it's Jen back with Holiday Foliage. We're going to just touch on a simple 4-patch in our block 3 hourglass block. We did that for last month, and now you're an expert and probably one of your favorite blocks, especially in combination with that Critter Grid 4.5, which is, I love that particular tool. So easy. Sometimes when we do a lot of checkerboard kind of 4-patch, we do strip piecing. Here we're just cutting 2.5-inch squares. If you love just being able to trace around a ruler that is that size, pick up the 2.5. It is something that later on you would be able to use as you are doing your half square triangle here, because those started off at 3 inches. They end up being trimmed to 2.5. And then into the quilt at 2. So that is one that's obviously optional, but if you love to just trace around a ruler like I do, be sure to pick up the 2.5, which is how I cut these. Now, of course, we're just doing some piecing. We can do some chain piecing, and this is where I will definitely put the guide back on my machine here. I took it off for some of the other blocks, and I like to just place it on right alongside my diagonal seam tape. And I love that ridge, right? Because my miss, everybody's got something. I go big. I go big on those 1/4-inch seam allowances, and my blocks were historically coming out smaller. And so this keeps me honest and doesn't let me do that with the ridge. Whenever you're doing something as simple as a 4-patch, you want to have interlocking seams when those come together. So for that reason, whether you're doing this particular block of the month or any 4-patch you're doing, choose your fabric. Let's say that it's a red fabric. Just press to the red the whole time. In this case, of course, it's green. The reason I'm going to make sure that I press to the green the whole time is when we place these in the opposite orientation, I will have interlocking seams. That's a lovely thing every single time. And we can place a pin. Anytime you want that intersection to come together, just so, that's our most important place, put that pin there first. And then pin the other areas afterward. And let's go sew with our 1/4-inch seam, of course. When you're doing a 4-patch, some people will press that seam open, absolutely. Some people have this technique, it's called almost like popping the center, where all the seams start to travel around together. And you can see when you start sewing this to the neighboring block, you're not trying to meet seams, right? This is just one solid, that's the side there that doesn't have a seam. You have the option of either pressing the seam open. I would not recommend pressing to one side or the other. You want to either press that seam open or do something called pop the seam. Notice how I push these, and now all the seams travel around in the same orientation. Some people like that. They feel like it stabilizes the block rather than opening up the seam and really kind of stressing the thread. They like to have those be running around and moving in opposite direction, or excuse me, all in the traveling kind of in the same direction, kind of all in this instance kind of counterclockwise, and it creates a cute little 4-patch. Just something, it's not in the pattern, that's just a bonus. And of course, this needs to be measuring 4.5, and we're going to set that aside. Hourglass, we know how to do that. Moving on to block 5. One thing I want to point out about this one is, you see how these are kind of 4.5, finishing at 4, of course. Here there's just a lot more going on in block 5. The main thing I want to show you here is actually the Flying Geese unit. This half square triangle, remember back when we did in block 2, when we made our half square triangles, we had one cream and one green, and we had those right side together, and you could draw the line or use the seam guide, however you prefer, and sew on a 1/4 inch on either side, and then cut that, and you had the two. Same thing, just obviously smaller. So that one we've already really covered. Here, in your pattern, I definitely want to show this to you. It's a really cool technique, and not at all the way I learned when I was first learning how to quilt. How I learned, fabric E, which is the red, would have been a rectangle, and the A's would have been squares, right side together with a square, draw on the line, sew on the line, and flip, trim the excess, and the same here. My Flying Geese units were hit and miss, to say the least, and there was a lot of waste. This is a really cool technique that you can use in combination with the Ultimate Flying Geese or not. It's not a requirement. It's a great way to make 4 flying geese very quickly instead of 1 at a time, the way we all learned, and with minimal waste and maximum precision. This is an oversized technique. So whatever fabric is that big, kind of that big delta, right? In this case, it's the E. And down in this unit, it would be the A, but we're working on this one right here. This is what we're going for, right here. That portion, you will cut 1 of those and then 4 of these. And that's going to produce 4 finished. It's going to produce 4 of these. Isn't that a cool thing? So of course, right side together in opposite corners. We've got that done ahead of time. And you can either use the seam guide again or draw the line, sewing on a 1/4 inch on either side. Some people, as in our video prep, like to clip that intersection where there's the overlap. If you take that option, I've done it both ways and had very good success both ways. If you do that, I'd recommend you certainly draw your lines, do all of that, but let's pretend that's drawn. And this is pinned. You're simply going to just come in here and clip. That's all you're going to do. You're just making the bulk of that disappear. See where you pin first, so nothing moves, but that's okay. Just in the opposite corner. And pin, right? Easier to draw the line, get everything pinned, and then snip that center because nothing's moving. Once you have that sewn, we'll simply remove our pins and, of course, as you are expecting, cut directly on that drawn line. And now we press to the outside. Here we press to the outside. Remember how we've had 1 of the large squares, 4 of the small. So far, we've only used 2 of our smaller cream squares, and we have 2 more. Let me just take that out of there so you're not confused by that. So there's only 2 on the table with me. And of course, you'd press that to the outside. With one of the other squares, you will place this directly in the corner, and again, you're either drawing the line or using the seam guide, sewing a 1/4 inch on either side, right? So we're going to sew that a 1/4 inch on either side, and again, you're going to trim. Like, let me just go do that. I want you to see this part. This is, and I want you to see this trimmed up. It's a really cool, and move my seam guide. I don't need that right now. Really cool technique. Cut on your drawn line, and again, pressing away. And now we have an oversized block, giving us the chance to trim up. The measurements in your pattern are having you trim this to 2.5 by 4.5. And if you're using a standard ruler, that's going to be very important to you. And this is a great one to use because this is 2.5. I love that. So that's going to give me an opportunity to be able to, in this instance, if I'm not using the Creative Grid, I could trim, turn again and trim, and then I'd have to move the ruler and trim the fourth side separately. But this is at least an option for you if you've got that ruler handy. Creative Grid knows Flying Geese have been around, that block's been around a long time, and people have struggled with it. So Creative Grid came to the rescue with a really cool tool. And I frankly do not make Flying Geese blocks with any other tool these days. I love the versatility of this. We know that the finished size, if we're trimming a block up to 2.5 by 4.5, when it's sewn into the project and it's finished, will be 2 by 4. So that's what I want to point out to you here is if the pattern's saying trim your block up to 2.5 by 4.5, that finished size is 2 by 4. That's letter D. And the reason that's significant is there's a trim function to this ruler, a trim 1 function and a trim 2. And you need to know what lines you're lining up with. For us, it's letter D right here. So I will take my oversized block, and there's my letter D, and I'm dropping those lines right over top of my oversized Flying Geese unit at this point. Trim 1 is going to allow me to trim the right side and rotate my mat and trim the top. This is why there's 2 trim functions, because I can only trim 2 sides at a time. I'll continue the rotation of the mat. Trim 2, I'm still trim letter D. Right here's my letter D. I'm going to drop that right into my slot. I've got this line, and this alignment here. Trimming once and trimming twice. Obviously producing a block far more accurate than I'm ever going to produce on my own with minimal waste, and I get to make 4 at a time. I love that. That combination of 1 red and 4 tan gives you 4 Flying Geese units. The other thing that I want to point out is obviously you're going to do other quilts of different sizes. The finished size versatility of the Ultimate Flying Geese gives you finished sizes of 1/2 by 1, which is as tiny and cute as can be, all the way up to 4 by 8, and all these sizes in between. So something you might want to add to your sewing room if you know you like using or making Flying Geese blocks. I want to mention that. This is the third and final video as I'm kind of just talking you through the rest of this, because really as we look at these other blocks, these are things we've done. We've done the half square triangles. That's how we got our half square triangle, or our hourglass blocks. We know how to make these, and we certainly know how to make our square in a square. Then once all of your blocks are complete, this is when your sashing will come into play, your cornerstones, your inner border, your outer border, and of course you're off to the quilters. So this has been a really fun kind of examination of precise piecing. Obviously certain tools are helping us to get to those accurate results that we're striving for. So thanks for giving me some of your time. Thanks for participating in Holiday Foliage. So much more coming your way in 2023, well into that, and even creeping into the next year as well. We are very busy planning projects for you. Subscribe, let a friend know as well, and I'll see you soon.